My name's Leyton Schnellert. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Curriculum and Pedagogy at the University of British Columbia. I had the great fortune to co-host and co-edit the working conference and the book that came out of the working conference around teacher leadership and contextualized agency. Catherine Smith, my co-editor, her passion in her area is teacher leadership, and it just happens to intersect with one of my areas of research, which is teacher professional learning. And in particular, I'm very, very interested in educational change from a social justice lens. And so it was kind of this perfect match because each of these CATE books and conferences are hosted by the past president and the president of the Canadian Association for Teacher Education. So the two of us came together and said, where is there some interest? But really, I'm following Catherine's lead as the past president at the time. And so this is her chance to offer something. And I was just so delighted, not only to support her, but the contribution this is going to make because there's a gap in terms of really offering Canadian research in this area. In the first chapter of the book, we do really take a little look back around frameworks that have been used to analyze teacher leadership. And we had two featured speakers at the conference, colleagues of ours, Dr. Catherine McGregor from the University of Victoria and Dr. Sabra Cherkowski from the University of British Columbia's Okanagan campus. And so each of them offered us some frameworks and some thoughts about what to attend to. And I was really, really provoked in a powerful way by Catherine McGregor's comments around really thinking about how we should be taking up a feminist lens, and how schooling and the institution of schooling themselves are quite colonized and reproducing a more than 100-year-old framework about how to be in society. And so part of the complexities of teacher leadership are pushing back against or disassembling some of the practices that we don't even think of, because we think of them as neutral, but they're not neutral. They're actually reproducing like a very dominant discourse about who gets what and why we get it. And so the complexities are all kinds of layers, like the diverse learners we work with, the context that we're in, but also just around the agency of teachers and how can we support them to, from the inside out, make change based on what they understand and what they know. The history or the grounding of the teacher research movement or field really comes out of Chicago in the 1980s, where groups of teachers came together and said, how do we make sure that we're not mapping onto kids of color our white identities and values? And so that kind of social justice orientation comes from those roots. But as I was saying a little earlier, the lingo that came out of that era is that who can best make change in education? The people who are in the center of the work. And so it really positions teachers in ways where they can say, what can I do and what do I believe in and what change can I make? And so instead of looking outward for people to tell us what to do, it really says we are best positioned to say, what can we do in these contexts with the relationships that we have and the knowledge that we have to make change in our contexts? And how can we, by doing that work from the inside, share that work with others to empower them to do similar work? And so it's really a kind of way to acknowledge that teacher leaders are flourishing educators who say the tensions that I experience are places for learning. My work is primarily in rural education, all throughout from the south here where I live in the Okanagan and Syilx territory up into the Arctic where I also do research. And some of what we've learned over time is that if we don't take the time to address barriers that are in place, and if we don't actually stop and say, what are students bringing, and see, particularly kids from diverse backgrounds or marginalized backgrounds, that they're actually bringing gifts and talents and strengths themselves, then we're really likely just going to reproduce the structures that we have. And so I think that teacher research with an equity lens is really saying, in my context with the students that I work with, how can I see them as informing me and helping me change what I do to better meet their needs and who they are? It really moves us away from a deficit perspective, and an equity lens suggests that there's strength and power in those whose voices we hear the least. And so I'm really excited about the kind of work that teacher leaders do around equity and social justice with that kind of a lens. I think that collaborative inquiry is a place where we move away from being teachers trying to make change by ourselves, but to realizing that when we collaborate with others to make change, we not only see more impact, but we also feel less alone. We find folks who have similar values or interests and say, what can we do together? Because teaching, as incredible it is to be working with kids all the time, it's also a little bit lonely. And so it's really nice to collaborate with other colleagues to say, what are you doing? What do you have? What are you trying? And really, we gain all kinds of energy together. It also helps to have a little bit of relational accountability because teachers are so busy. So if we're engaging in collaborative inquiry, whether it's with a partner or a group of colleagues, we're more likely to keep going with our efforts because we share some values, we have some shared goals, and we can stick with it and engage in that work iteratively over time. So the Canadian Association for Teacher Education, we span across pre-service teacher work, so teacher education programs, as well as doing in-service work. But what we want to highlight through this book is that if we attend to and engage with folks who are in the process of becoming teachers, and we engage with them from their strengths and their commitments, then we're really supporting them to be agents of change, to not become lost in a system which is quite overwhelming, especially as a new teacher, to say, what do I believe in? And how do I start now engaging in and working from where I can to make change? And so when folks begin their careers with an understanding that they're leading from wherever they stand, it creates opportunities to say, what else can I contribute and how else can I lead? Whether it's being a professional development chair at your school or taking a teacher candidate to work with. But really, if we start that thinking right from the beginning that we all have something to offer and we all have agency in the work that we do, and we're change makers every day in our classroom, then we're really recognizing and supporting folks to have that leadership capacity right from the beginning and that they can tap into that as they progress through their career. If we think about the bigger field of educational change or school improvement, there is a continued attention to whatever we're doing, what's the impact for students? And so it does remind us to center what we're doing around students and their learning and what's going on. And for myself, whether I use my literacy hat to say, how am I ensuring that everyone's having more successful literacy outcomes, being more passionate about reading, but also building their skills at reading? Or am I using my math science STEM hat where I'm like, are kids engaged? Do they see themselves as scientists and mathematicians? Like, what's going on? If I'm always looking back at kids and their learning, that's really making sure that the things that I'm doing are making a difference and not just importing something to say, this is the new thing that we should do, instead of what's the thing I should ethically do to nurture and support the learners that I'm working with to move them forward. And so I do think there's a constant effort, if you will, to ensure that what we're doing in terms of teacher leadership is really focusing on learners and honoring them and helping them grow and including students. Maybe that's the biggest move we're seeing, is including kids' voices in teacher leadership work so that we're not making assumptions, but we're hearing from them and working with them to make change, that the kids are developing agency at the same time as teacher leaders are developing agency. I so appreciated coming back to Manitoba. I was born in Winnipeg and my family's from Steinbach. And so there was something about coming back to Manitoba that was pretty incredible. We had a magnificent time. We were so well taken care of, from technology to spaces to be together. I built 2 new research projects and studies with folks that are there at Brandon. It's a place where things happen because folks are in conversation. And so we saw that happen not just for our conference, but we connected with folks at the university there too. And so I really feel like if we can even try to replicate the experience we had in Brandon with that sense of community and connection and inquiry and making change. I so enjoyed talking to Michelle Lamb and connecting with her around rural education and social change, and Joe Stouffer, thinking about literacy and what we can do. And so I just know that if I can take the experience we had at Brandon and have a similar experience next time, we'll really have done something special, because people will feel not just connected because they attended, but they'll have learned something by being in that place and making new connections with folks at the university. So in our next iteration, I believe that the call for proposals came out today. It literally came out in the newsletter today. And so we're looking at how teacher educators, so folks working in faculty of education or folks in the field, how they are taking up or working with place-based or land-based approaches or pedagogies. So how is where you live or where you work or where you teach connected to the work that you do? And how are you trying to make change either with your place or in support of your place? And really understanding that learning and teaching and making change, and maybe teacher education should always be contextualized and situated and happen in partnership or in relationship, not just with the community, but with the land and the stewards of that land or the original peoples of that place.